Well, welcome you guys to another episode of The Common Theory. I'm your host, Chris, along with my man, Dallas. And we are going to bring you a very fun topic today about healthy tournament deck building. So, we're kind of going to be looking at a lot of different topics on, what you want for the competitive slash tournament scene.
For sure. And a big topic today is talking about that time limit that you're going to see in those tournament settings, right? We're talking 90-minute rounds typically. We're talking about how you should work on building your deck to take advantage of that and work within those constraints.
Oh yeah, definitely. And there's so many intricacies about it, right? We have so many cool things. I mean, we got to worry about our opponents, right? Game action, time actions. It's a fun day. It's a fun day. I'm really excited about this one. So,
Alrighty. Well, to kick us off here, we're going to begin by talking about the end. We're going to talk about how you actually win games. We're talking about having reliable win conditions in your competitive Pauper EDH decks. So, what are some things that would make a win condition reliable?
I mean, that's a pretty good one, right? This is like one thing that you'll typically see in a lot of events, right? Like you're not going to have the deck that dirtles. You're going to have the deck that comes in hard with your combo strategy, right? Or maybe an aggressive strategy that you know can reliably beat the table, which I think is a interesting thing about being a reliable win condition, right?
Yeah, definitely a lot of decks that are going to be a lot more proactive in forcing their own game plan. There's still going to be some reactive elements, obviously. It's a near necessity in this format to be able to react, especially to creatures. But a lot of the time, especially with the time constraints under a tournament, you want to be really fast and able to just enforce your game plan, even through disruption.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's kind of like the whole joke about a lot of these players come by playing solitaire, right? Like they're gonna come in, do their thing, and kind of ignore what you're doing. But that doesn't mean you could completely ignore someone, right? And I think we have a couple pretty good little cards and like situations, right? And examples that it'll help alleviate some of the questions someone might have, right? And I think the first and the most simplistic one that we have is good old Dargo Ketis, right? If you brought this deck to an event, you don't need to know the metagame at all. You don't need to know what's happening. You don't have to care about any of those things. You're just going to play your Dargo as fast as you can, put your Ketis down, and attack who's ever open. And you're going to equally hit the table. It's kind of drives itself in a sense, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of monocolor decks do get this advantage where, due to the lack of card selection, like due to how few cards they have access to, they tend to pick pretty strong commanders to make up for that, and that kind of streamlines their game plan. And typically, those decks tend to be on the faster end, in my experience.
Yeah, definitely. Yep, that's kind of like one of those weird cards like the Dargo, right? The Dargo train is how some people call it. It just comes in blistering fast and really gets to the point. But we also have a couple pretty good little caveats with this about consistency with your reliability, right? So, for instance, one good old card back in the day, which, maybe we could speak about this one a little bit more in depth, but in the day, in the past time, I would like to say cranial plating was a reliable way to win the game. And I'm not saying it isn't reliable, but for the time constraint we have here, that might not be true anymore, right? Like we need to be able to reliably end the game as quickly as possible within our time frame. And this is, taking out all three players, right? So it's a bit difficult with the cranial plating. What are your thoughts on that, Dallas? What do you got for me?
Yeah, cranial plating is a really interesting one because obviously it can provide that massive power spike, and it can be a win condition if it's tacked onto a Dargo or any other flying creature that you have sitting around, any other trampler, unblockable creatures, stuff like that. but it does require you to just kind of whittle people down still, even if you're smacking them for 5, 7 damage. You're still trying to get through 3 players at that point, and it can just be a bit slow, and it requires you to build up the board state with artifacts, stuff like that. So it can be difficult to win in the time constraint. Whereas, something like a combo deck that is just going to wipe the entire table as soon as they get infinite mana has a lot less issues with that kind of thing, right? They kill everybody at once. They do it as soon as they meet a specific criteria. They don't have to meet multiple criteria and do it over time, one at a time.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But like, so there's certain things. So I'd like to throw these 2 cents out there, just so, like, the audience understands this kind of subject. That we're not saying like cranial plating is bad or things of that nature, right? Like these, a perfect example I have is Baleful Strix. That's an incredibly competitive deck, right? But for that deck to win in this time constraint that we are abiding by is much more difficult than Dargo Ketis, right? It's not saying that Dargo Ketis is better. It's just saying for the tournament setting that we're providing here, it's going to be much more difficult to be able to play something in those lines. Even though the deck is competitive, but it just has a difficulty being able to win within that time period, right?
Yeah, another interesting thing to note in that area is that, well, I did bring up like combo decks killing everyone at once, right? That doesn't mean that it's faster than combat in some decks, right? So you've got decks like Dargo Ketis and Gut Leader and these super aggressive decks that do win by combat, and some of them, like Gut Leader, do kill people one at a time, but just the rate that they build their board and pump out that damage is fast enough that they can actually be faster than some of those combo decks.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually a pretty interesting point because what ends up happening there is they take out the most threatening player, right? And they just move in order. So it's I don't know. I like the consistency that these decks are bringing to the table, right? And that's, once again, we're falling back on our win conditions, like where our win conditions are, the command zone, things of that nature. So it's pretty nice. I would like to throw out there, though, I think I'm kind of going to touch on one of our other subjects here. I think the deck of knowledge is actually a pretty key point here, though, right?
Yeah, for sure. There are definitely some decks that have a lot of modality or a lot of game actions or things of that nature, or like a bunch of tutors can really get you in this space too, where you have to try to take into account the board state at every turn that you could tutor, decide if you want to spend that mana on the tutor or hold it for interaction, so on and so forth. And in the instance of tutors, you have to know exactly what's in your deck that you can actually tutor for, because we don't have unconditional tutors. So
Yeah.
they can make things really complicated, and really knowing your deck is the best way to make sure that you can do these things in a timely manner and not waste your time and everyone else's time and end up drawing every round because you couldn't find your win in time.
Oh yeah, like that just brings it back to, right, like some of these like control decks, like I feel that you're going to have a lot of difficulty seeing a lot of these control decks in, or even like certain mid-range deck strategies, because of how long they take to pilot some of them. Not all, of course, but some. And the reliability of their win cons, right? It's just like you said, you have to set up your board state, you have to set up these different parameters, meet these, and then begin to whittle your opponents down, right? So it is not the fastest or sharpest knife in the shed, right? But it is still can be effective at times.
Yeah, and some of these control decks have the ability to give up some of their control elements to play more win conditions, more combo pieces, more whatever. Like Malcolm Breaches is a deck that typically doesn't play a super fast game, but it does have strong combos with Malcolm and Reckless Fireweaver, stuff like that, where it can just focus more on getting that combo and be more combo oriented instead of control, while still maintaining a bit of that grind element in case you need it. But a lot of control decks have that aspect, and some of them just can't, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean that brings us all the way back right now. Like what I really find interesting about this subject as a whole is that we kind of just everything circles within itself. So it's really easy to jump from one subject to the other with these topics. So deck knowledge is another one of our topics, and I'm going to kind of be bouncing back and forth with my man Dallas here on these. So you'll hear the weird transitions we have, but deck knowledge, and I think this is a good one to pop off of you, right? Gretchen is a deck, and you've said it in one of our previous podcasts. I find the deck, if you don't know what you're doing, the amount of game actions you could take are insane because of Gretchen, right? Like I've seen you with 12 open mana, and then I don't remember the name of the card. It's the 1 mana enchant land that lets you untap that land.
Urban Burgeoning? Yeah.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So you end up untapping that on every player's untap step. And so you're taking game action after game action after game action on everyone's turn. And the amount. So because you know the deck, that is not a big deal. But maybe someone newer to the deck is going to have a little bit more difficulty, right? Figuring out, like, look at this card, take a few moments, then look at your hand, take a few moments, then put it to the bottom, put it to the top. Like, we're just kind of running that circle where if I have my deck knowledge and I actually practice or play the solitaire with it, I could move a lot smoother and cleaner and more effectively during these events.
Yeah, and I think that's just part of the discussion where, some decks just have more options than others, right? Like, especially some of those streamlined aggro decks, they don't draw cards. Their win condition is in the command zone, and they're gonna win or lose based on how that win condition resolves, right? Whereas some decks with, for example, Gretchen, because that's my example for everything, has, like you said, especially in those instances where you get 4 mana guaranteed every turn, you have to decide if you want to spend it on interaction or drawing cards or just activating Gretchen and trying to ramp or tutoring and all these things, and it gets so convoluted so quick that you really have to just know what you're doing.
Yeah, I kind of like what you said though, right? Like you actually said, like those decks don't need to draw cards, which is kind of like a little false thing in the format, right? A lot of people believe you're supposed to have like a full grip because it's Pauper and you're able to. But if you have the board state to end the game, the board state's going to take care of it for you, right? You can beat everybody if they have a full grip of cards. So it's kind of crazy how the whole cycle and everything works. But let me throw a few examples at you, man. Let's bounce some of this stuff off. And because you said Malcolm Breaches, I'm going to throw these 2 cards at you because I find these cards to be very good for tournament play, especially in a Malcolm deck, which should be obvious at this point as soon as we say them. Fiery Cannonade. That card is like the nuts, right, in a pirate deck. So that card specifically is so effective because you get to mess with all your opponents, right?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Fiery Cannonade, 3 mana red instant that just deals 2 damage to every non-pirate. So especially in Malcolm Breaches, which is a pirate control deck typically, it's not going to wipe some of your board. It's going to do good damage to your opponent's board. It can be used as a weird little combat trick, stuff like that. So this is a really efficient piece of removal and interaction that can do a lot of work. It does require you to hold up 3 mana, but typically that's not horrendously difficult. However, it does struggle in terms of its efficiency. As for how much damage it does, right? This only does 2 damage, which isn't enough to, for instance, kill a Peregrine Drake. So in those instances, you'd rather be holding up just a Lightning Bolt, right? But Lightning Bolt doesn't compare in some ways to the Fiery Cannonade.
Yeah, exactly. But there's just so many cards that are like that, right? Like, I find that to be kind of wild. So you have to be very careful with your card choices, right? Because if you just have Diabolic Edict, right? 2 mana instant, super simple, target player sacrifices a creature. Most simplistic card Magic's pretty much ever printed. But the problem with that is now we're just single spot removing one person, right? And that's kind of a big deal. Like a big deal. So I think we alleviate some of that with cards like Chain Devil, right? Just 4 mana creature. Each player sacrifices a non-token creature, right? Boom, simple. Gets the job done, but it affects the board state, which is kind of relevant when you have 3 opponents, right?
So are you telling me I shouldn't play targeted removal, Chris?
No, 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 no. Not saying that, because where there's a will, there's a way, right? And it's just like you were saying with Lightning Bolt, right? We can't kill the Peregrine Drake without the Lightning Bolt. So we do have to give it, there is a give and take with some of these cards, right? Definitely, definitely. I think so. Let me throw this one at you, because I think out of all the cards that we have listed and examples, we have one card that is incredibly difficult to assess, and I think it's one of the most complicated cards, honestly, in our format, because the card's amazing, but the card is a win condition, but it stalls the game, but then it doesn't win the game, and then it gets you killed because it comes into play, and the card is just ridiculous, right? So let's go with our good old buddy, Crypt Rats. Good old Crypt Rats. What hit me with this one, man? This one is just come on, am I wrong with this craziness I'm saying? Like, help me out
Yeah.
here.
So, for those who aren't aware, Crypt Rats is a 2 and a black for a 1/1 rat that has pay X mana, and it deals X damage to each creature and each player, and you can only spend black mana on X. So, this card is really interesting because in some ways it's a win condition, right? If I have more life than everybody else, and I play a Crypt Rats, and I have enough black mana to activate it and just bomb the entire board, it hits phase 2. So it can just kill people like that. Pair this with a card like Falkenrath Noble, things like that, where they deal damage whenever creatures die, and you can just get absurd amounts of damage out of this. Give it lifelink, and you've basically ended the game against any deck that doesn't combo or kill through commander damage. Stuff like that. But it also makes you the target for some decks, right? We played a game recently where I was playing Kadira, Caller of the Small, who basically just makes a bunch of 1/1 rabbit tokens. That's all she does. And you try to swarm the board. And Chris played a Crypt Rats, and I was like, okay, well, now I have to kill you because I literally cannot win the game when that card is in play, right?
Yep. It's like the situations. Like on the surface, you look at this card, and this is like we were talking before, you guys, and one of the cool things that got mentioned was there are certain cards that are a trap. And I call me crazy, but if you're newer to the format, I'd highly suggest you learn Crypt Rats before you just hop in with this, because you're going to throw this into play on curve it out on turn 3. Table's going to look at you and go, yeah, you're dying. You're going to be like, whoa, what just happened? And it's just the situations this card puts you in are so awkward. Like, I've been in situations where my opponent slams it out and they have the wrong colored mana to pop it, but they have enough mana if they untap to beat me. So I just go, oh, okay, look at you. Sorry, buddy. Get out of here. And boom, wipe them off out of the game. But now I just lost to the next player. So it's like, what kind of weird situations are these cards putting you in, right?
Here's an interesting one on the topic of cards that can end up stalling the game out and actually coming to time. What are your thoughts on Oubliette? So Oubliette is 1 and 2 black for an enchantment that when it enters play, target creature phases out until it leaves the battlefield. And it taps the creature if it comes back. This is an interesting one because this is like objectively one of, if not the best piece of removal in the format, because whenever a creature phases out, it doesn't change zones, which means you can completely phase out a commander and they can't put it back in the command zone. You can just lock somebody's entire strategy out of the game. And Oubliette can create an interesting situation where if I cast an Oubliette on Chris's commander, and that commander was, say, Dargo Kedis, and I Oubliette the Dargo, right? And all you've got is a Kedis now.
Oh yeah.
Other players will sometimes try to protect me and my Oubliette so that Chris can't play the game.
Oh yeah.
And that puts you in a weird spot where the game can drag on because everyone's pumping their resources into making sure the player who's already been hit with an Oubliette can't remove the Oubliette, and it just gets in a really awkward situation.
So that brings us right back, right, to the healthiness of your deck building, right? So yes, we have actually been into this situation, and it's really crazy because Oubliette used to be one of those cards that was like Cry Wolf, right? It needs to get banned. But now it's like these decks, and Dargo Kedis is a perfect example, right? That deck has won with Dargo under an Oubliette. And ironically, my 12-year-old daughter is one of the first, that was the first pilot to pilot that deck and beat a player that Oublietted her Dargo and won without the Dargo. And that comes on to your deck building, right? So the deck needs to be able to still function without certain key pieces. And you have to be okay, right? Coming into a tournament setting and knowing there are cards that will beat you. And you either choose to lose to that card or you choose to beat that card, right? Like, it's just like we're talking about these reliable win conditions. If I don't bring Graveyard Hate, Ghostly Flicker is going to walk all over me, right? So I have to be okay with losing to that at some point, right? Or play against it. So we have to have certain deck building requirements in here. And I think Oubliette is one of the other poster childs, right? Like, if I'm going into an event, and actually, let me rephrase this. If I sit down across and I'm on Dargo Kedis and my opponent's on Mono Black, I know they have that card. That might make me be a bit more aggressive towards that player because they do have cards that influence my decision making, right?
Yeah, that example's pretty easy to talk about because it's pretty linear, right? I don't think Mono Red has a single piece of enchantment removal at common.
No, we do have a few artifacts that'll do it for us, but they are just absurd.
Yeah, like
they're
seven
mana. Yeah, they're just absurd. It's
unplayable cards. Yeah. So
yeah,
Mono Red's
you're
a
not
really,
bringing this.
really easy target for this conversation.
Oh yeah. But let's move to the opposing side of the spectrum. So let's go from blistering speed. Let me hit you with the literal opposite side of the spectrum. Our good old buddy Armix. I find Armix. I love Armix. I find him to be one of the most powerful cards in the format as a whole. I have put that card into play against my opponents with cards like Tatiova and Weavers, and they're just like, cool, can't put my commander in play. So Armix is insane. But it's like you were saying, what did I just say real quick, right? Now I just stalled the game. Because little Armix is only a 3, and I'm trying my best to get that win across, right? But I need to make sure good old Armix can act effectively kill my opponents, right? What do you think about Armix, though? Like, give me your thoughts on it. Have you had some experiences with Armix?
Oh, I sure have, Chris, and I think you know that. For people who don't know, Armix 3-mana 3/2 Golem. Whenever he attacks, you can discard a card, and if you do, target creature defending player controls gets -X/-X until end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts you control plus the number of artifacts in your graveyard, and he has partner. So this commander is just walking removal. He turns any card you draw into removal whenever he swings. In my experience, this commander can be absurdly oppressive. if it gets to stick, and a lot of times people do not want this commander to stick because a lot of decks, almost every deck, is basically creature based in some capacity, right? Even
Oh yeah,
combo decks, we don't have a combo in this format that wins the game without a creature. That's just
exactly.
not how the format works. And while this is sorcery speed, so you can still win with flicker stuff, blah blah blah. He's still very oppressive, but as you mentioned, sometimes he just can't win the game. And I know we played a game where I was playing Gretchen. Gretchen is an 0-4, so you know you gotta have at least 4 artifacts in play in the first place. And we got
Too
to a
easy.
point that I think I cast Gretchen, who's a 2 mana commander, for 14 mana.
Yep.
Because, my deck plays a lot of ramp, but I literally got hit with Armix every turn for so long and was able to just chump block it, bounce it, blah, 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 so on and so forth. And the game took like 3 hours or something. It took so long because sometimes you just can't find a win condition, and especially with Armix, you're discarding a card every time you want to use that ability. So you're not able to actually get advantage. You just have to keep on going in with Armix.
Yep. Yep. Like that's kind of like another one of these trap cards, right? And I love Armix. I think Armix is a bonkers card, like I already said. But you almost trap yourself because you lock yourself into stopping these players from doing anything. And I've already had it to where I'm like, you know what? I'm so far gone. I got them so far down in the hole. If I just stop for one turn, I got this. And then I stop for the one turn, and then they magically come back, and I'm like, oh, I just lost. Like I just lost to myself. I could have kept the oppression, but I didn't. I was like, I need to just take a turn off. Can't take a turn off in Pauper. The value of a lot of cards are so strong and so good, and that's kind of like one of the flaws, right? Like I made that mistake, and Saddle Armix, well, Saddle Armix. So I was super, super sad about it. And it's, I don't know. I think he's a trap in tournament play, unless, quick caveat, unless you are highly experienced with Armix, right? Like that experience, I think, goes a long way, like a very, very long way.
For
So
sure. Yeah, and Armix is another commander that has a lot of decision points, right? You got to know
yeah,
who to swing at, what you want to discard, what you want to kill. If you can get enough artifacts into play to kill what you need to kill, if you can bother trading if they have more than one creature in play, blah blah blah. Just so much packed into this one card.
well, like that's one of the issue with Armix, though, right? Like it's unforgiving, and going into a tournament, you don't want a deck that's gonna just have you lose the game because you just decided to not lightning bolt a creature or Armix in one turn, right? Like the solitaire is kind of like the safe way to do the thing, the the safer way for the newer players to really get into the format, right?
Yeah, for sure. So let's move on to talking about the importance of playing on curve and making sure you're actually having an effect on the early game.
Well, I think we messed up one thing, man. I think we got one thing.
Oh, did
We
we?
forgot our deck of the week, man.
Oh,
Our
that's
deck of
true.
the
Let's
week.
do that.
We got our deck of the week before we get on to the second half here. So this week is mine. Um, and I'm gonna kind of hit you guys with more of a generic deck this week. Uh, I have been a fan of good old Abdel Adrian. Abdel is a 5 mana, 4 colorless, 1 white commander. When Abdel Adrian enters the battlefield, you exile any number of non-land permanents and you control, and then until Abdel Adrian leaves the battlefield, you create a 1/1 white soldier creature token for each card exiled this way. It's a really weird card. It's just a weird card. It has a lot of weird rulings, a lot of weird things about it. But Abdel was like the poster child for Commander Legends Baldur's Gate when it came out, right? Like, my gosh, was just this. That was the topic of discussion. Abdel this, Abdel that, Abdel this, right? It was just kind of absurd. But the problem Abdel has is it kind of is too absurd, right? Like, it's just so powerful that a lot of players bring it out and they just lose with it because they're just getting like 3v1 every time you play it. I still think the deck is worthwhile, and I think the deck is going to be worthwhile in a tournament setting because everyone there is going to be as threatening, right? You're going to be playing against Tatiovas, you're going to be playing against Gretchens, right? You're going to be playing against gut leaders, like just these powerhouse decks, right? So if you bring another powerhouse deck, you're never going to fall into that line of, oh, bro, you're the strongest deck at the table. You know, we gotta beat you. I'm experimenting with this new deck, right? I don't think that's going to happen. What are your thoughts? Like, I don't think I could sell you on this one because you've seen the deck before. And, oh, I forgot to mention. I'm talking about Abdel X Blue. Kind of doesn't really matter because none of the backgrounds are really good for Abdel. Let's be honest. But,
Yeah, not until we get Candlekeep Sage.
Yeah. Cough, ban it. If that happens, cough, ban it.
Yeah, it would probably need to get banned
Cough,
if it ever became
cough,
legal,
cough.
but it'd be fun for like 2 weeks.
I would be so oppressive. Oh my gosh, that would be insane.
But yeah,
But yeah,
I think Abdel is another commander that's just like obscenely strong, like you were saying. And yeah, I think it does struggle, especially in some more experimental pods, because it does get targeted a lot, like a lot of those really strong decks do, and well-known oppressive decks. And Abdel is one that just... I think part of the reason Blue Abdel struggles is because people see it and go, wow, so you're doing Flicker, but you're also building a board state that I'm not able to break through. And if you can't kill me with the Flicker loop for some reason, you just have 1/1s that can kind of punch over me. And
Yeah.
he's just so consistent because, you know, you get to play Mana Rocks and stuff, and they're also combo pieces. And you get to play value ETB creatures, and they're also combo pieces. And just all of this stuff accumulates into one ball of, I'm gonna do my thing, and you literally cannot do anything about it. That it really scares a lot of players.
Yep, I don't disagree. And that's kind of like one of the issues the deck has, but I wanted to bring it up because I think there needs to be a few more people out there playing it, right? Like,
Yeah, I'd love to see this in like a full-on tournament and see what happens when it's actually playing against like full combo pods and stuff like that.
right, exactly. Like, that's it might even take the reign of like the aggro deck at the table, which is kind of nutty to even think about, right? Because you could produce so many tokens so quickly and just never combo, and you're just sitting there beating your opponents in with your tokens.
I think you'd probably be better suited playing a different variant of Abdel if you want to go that route. I think if you're playing blue-white combo Abdel at a combo pod, you're kind of in that weird situation where you're like, I will win if nobody else is able to pull through with their win, right? Like, everyone else is going to be stopping each other, blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't really matter if they counter you, because you're just going to keep getting value the whole time. And I think it's more of that just consistent value from the command zone, getting those triggers every time.
Oh yeah, I don't disagree.
But yeah, it'd be an interesting spot for sure.
Oh yeah. Well, enough about good old Abdel. That was kind of my 2 cents, and I appreciate the opinion on Abdel for our deck of the week. Hopefully, I see it around a little bit more often. Big fan. Just it's kind of like it's hard to see people playing the deck.
I do have a question for you on your deck of the week. What do you think of Biblioplex Assistant Lines, which is a 4-mana 2/1 flying gargoyle that when it enters the battlefield, you put up to 1 instant or sorcery from your graveyard on top of your library? And I know some Abdel lists play it and some don't. it has combo lines. If you have a creature that enters the battlefield and draws a card, then you can use it in the Flicker loop to recast things and stuff like that. What do you think about those lines in Blue Ebdel specifically?
I think you have to play them. And I'm saying this through experience to tell you the truth, but the reason I say you have to play them, it's the most like concealed win the deck has. So you put it into play, and from my experience, you put the Biblioplex and your opponents are like, "Oh, that's like the worst one in the whole deck." And you're like, "It is." You never say it's bad, you just or say it's good. You're like, "It is the worst of all of them." And they're kind of like, "Oh, that's fine." And then you play Acrobatic Maneuver or any of the blink spells that net you a card, or just play some really weird like creature that nets you a card, or an
Oh,
artifact
Spirited
that
Companion
nets you a
is
card.
so weird.
Yep, there's some artifact that nets you a card. You just kind of have it there in play, and people kind of ignore that card because they're like, that card's not good. You're like, it is bad. And then you win. And I'll go on record. 3 of my recent wins with the deck have been through those lines because they're kind of just like the kind of it's not Archaeomancer, right? So like your opponents aren't as afraid of it, so they kind of just let it be. They're like, that one's just bad. Oh, you have Archaeomancer in play, kill Archaeomancer. And you're like, yeah, leave the assistant alone. And as crazy as this sounds, it flies, so it's actually pretty good in combat.
For
So
sure.
I have taken the initiative from people with that card. So it's strange, but it made me get a land drop. So I
And
am
it is
about it.
not easy to take that initiative back from Ebdel. Yikes.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Exactly.
But yeah, we can go ahead and move on now.
All right. All right.
So, anyways, let's get back to Plague on Curve.
Oh yes,
Insert
this is. I'm
this
excited
again.
for this one. This
Um,
one. This one I'm excited about.
so yeah, in competitive play in general, the goal is usually to impact the game as soon as you feasibly can with your deck, right? You want to
Oh
be
yeah.
getting there, getting the job done. And this is especially true in tournament play whenever you're on a timer. So, one of the topics for today is talking about tapped lands, especially in 2 or 3 color decks. How many do you think you should play? What's the advantages? What's the disadvantages? Give us a story here, Chris.
All right, man. So let me. I'm gonna have to end up passing it back with you because I believe you've been in a few of the servers longer than me. Granted, I believe I've played the format longer than you, but I think we have different experiences because mine was more in person and yours was more over the computer. So let's let me hit you with this one. When I started at least over Discord and stuff like that, but not in like in person with other players I've played against. We played a lot of basic lands. We were like, no, we're just going to play basic lands. And we just kind of stuck to 2-color decks. We didn't go into 3 colors. We didn't go into 4 colors. We just stayed with our 2-color decks because we liked having untapped lands. And a lot of us, because Pauper wasn't very like the norm at the time, we played our Pauper decks against normal EDH decks, which is kind of weird. But what was your original experience with tapped lands so people kind of figure out where, like, kind of where we're coming from? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so the way that I initially started playing the format, similar to you, was I played Weavers against EDH decks for a few months before I started playing online. And that deck doesn't play many tapped lands. But then when I started playing online and could kind of play against actual Pauper decks, I started with Sidrax's Spectre, which is a 3-color deck, Grixis. And I played a lot of tapped lands in that deck, and it never felt that bad. There were times when I was unhappy with it, but the deck was super predatory on the super combo heavy meta that I was playing in at that point, that I could just kind of get away with playing tapped lands because I was just making sure nobody was winning the game for a decent amount of time, and then I would just kind of end up winning over top. But as time has progressed, I've definitely leaned a lot more towards playing more basics and untapped lands if I can.
Yeah. Like it makes sense, right? Like the original way I used to do it too, like I was a big crackling Drake person. I had that deck forever and a day. And originally I had a ton of tap lanes. I had like 8. Just all sorts of different come into play tap lanes, whatever it could. Didn't matter what it was, if it made me 2 colors or it could fetch a land or anything like that, it was in the deck. Over time, and now if we just jump all the way to the future now, I I think the way the speed has increased in the format now, you are not getting away with playing a grip full of tap lanes. If your game plan is turn 1 tap lane, turn 2 rock, turn 3 rock tap lane, turn 4 start playing the game with everybody, that's almost like a disaster, right? Like you are hurting. You have these blistering fast decks now that are coming at you. I mean, Gretchen can win on turn 3, right? Like we
Yeah,
have
Gretchen
decks.
can win on turn 2 optimally. So, yeah.
Yeah, so like we have these crazy decks now that if you're just like, I'm not doing really anything, that's not the norm anymore. So, for instance, my personal take, I'm actually experimenting with a new deck right now, a control deck, and I have 2 tap lands in the whole deck. 2. And one is an artifact land, and it synergizes with the rest of the deck. And the other one is just a blue-black come into play tap land. Gains me a life, because the life is very relevant for a control deck. And
Yeah.
that's all I have. Like, I think the tempo loss, like, I do believe you could play about 4 total. That's my thought process on it, but what are your thoughts on how many? Now, granted,
Yeah.
let me throw this out
Not
there.
a hard
Like,
number.
yeah, not a
Don't
hard
get mad.
number. Yeah, that is wrong. I'm looking at it from decks that I play. Let me
But
throw that out
yeah.
there.
So I just took a look at mine. So Draxus Spectre is on like 8 or something, which is rough, but it's kind of necessary whenever the commander has 3 pips in it.
Yep. But would you take that to a
But
tournament?
no, I would not bring that to a tournament.
Yeah.
Anyways,
See.
Gretchen, I just checked, and I have 4 tapped lands. 5 if you count Mystic Sanctuary. That one's questionable if it's tapped or not. And I don't like that I have to play that many, but the tapped lands that the deck is on are kind of necessary.
Yeah.
And then I
You
have
could fetch
like,
some of them.
yeah, they're typically you're fetching them anyways, so it's not a big deal. And
Yep.
my Liara Commander Liara Porter deck, which is a more aggressive mid-range deck, is on 2 tapped lands, and I never have issues in that deck with tapped lands, which I appreciate a lot. It's been amazing because I know when I built that deck, I got a lot of questions about the mana base specifically. They were like, "Why are you playing so many basics?" I was like, "Because
Yeah.
I need to be able to do very specific things on turns 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that means no tapped lands, unless I
Yep.
absolutely have to."
I had the exact same experience with Gut Leader. The exact same experience. I believe I play 2 tap lanes in that deck. Don't quote me on that. I haven't checked, but I believe I'm on 2. Now I do play some colorless lands if that matters, but they're just good. They synergize with the deck. They're Darksteel Citadel and Ash
Mm-hmm.
Barrens.
Yeah,
So, but you can't like one tempo flaw with decks like that is insane. You have to be able to keep up pressure.
yeah. I actually put in an extra tapped land in Liara. I was originally only on the dual artifact land, and I put in the campus just in case the game goes late. It gives you a bit of extra scrying power and trigger helps with your Liara triggers, blah blah blah.
Mm.
But even that one's not necessary. And if you feel like it's still too many, you can play 1 tapped land in Liara pretty easily. You could cut it to 0 if you really wanted to, but then pips can become a bit of an issue. So I still
Yeah.
like having 2, but still, I think 2 is a great number for decks that are really aggressive or have really specific early game plans.
Oh yeah. Like it's funny in the deck building process with Dargo Kedis. I started that deck. I know I'm gonna sound crazy. I started that deck with 6 coming to play tap lands. I know,
Ew!
like
What?
yeah, I
Why?
did some
In your
crazy. So
monocolor deck?
I was trying the Zendikar lands that come into play tapped, and like target creature can't block, and then like Dwarven Mine, and like all these weird lands, and
I do like
yeah,
Dwarven
Needle.
Mine because that one's the sometimes untapped one. I don't think that one's
Well,
bad, but
Well, it was bad when I had a bunch of lands that weren't mountains, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah, that does make that land
like,
even worse. Yeah,
yep. So it was super rough, and I was a monocolor deck, right? And it was just like I would lose one like turn to lightning bolt somebody where they were tapped out, and then they untapped and had the counter spell, and I lost the game, right? So there's so many situations where that tempo loss is such a big deal nowadays, especially now that we're getting into these tournaments now with our format, right? It's finally moving to this.
I think another interesting thing you brought up, inadvertently, kind of with the Dwarven Mine was talking about like you needed that mountain count, right? This is significantly more of an issue for blue decks, especially blue X decks, because they're basically all on Mystic Sanctuary, right? Because that card's absurd.
Oh, it's busted. It's busted.
But
Yeah,
it
for sure.
requires you to have 3 other islands at play. So that land specifically makes blue decks really want to gear towards playing islands, and that's confounded with the fact that they have High Tide. So these blue decks like really want to be playing basic islands or the dual type lands that we have access to.
Yep. Yeah, Wizards did really well when they brought out those like come into play tap twisties, right? That was super cool that they did that, and the fact that they made a second like iteration of them, I was like, wow, like only getting better from here for us for the format.
Yeah, those are 2 of the 4 tapped lands in Gretchen. They're they're
Yep.
just
Yep.
so valuable, and especially in Simic, you have High Tide, you have Arbor Elf, you have Utopia Sprawl, you have Farseek, you have Spoils of Victory. You have so many cards that care about forest or island that having 2 cards that are both is just so absurd.
Yeah, exactly. I've been a big fan of a lot of these like dual lands. I've actually so here's a funny one for everybody. In my recent deck building, I slotted them in to slot them in, not realizing that I ended up putting like 6 come into play tap lanes, and I didn't even need them, right? Because I had no mountain synergy, no swamp synergy. I just slotted them in because they've almost looked as if they're an auto include now, which they're not. Throwing that out there, but it was almost just like, oh yeah, these are the duels of the format. Let's start pushing them in the sleeves. Oh wait, nope, I don't need those. Nope, I don't need those. Nope, I don't need those. So
Yeah, and you especially have to be wary if you're in those situations where you have 0 synergy with them being basic land types, and you're playing them, and it's like, why aren't you playing a campus or an artifact duel or X
Bajuka
other
Bog.
duel? Yeah,
Bajuka Bog.
Bajuka Bog,
Yeah.
Path of Ancestry, Opal
Oh, yeah.
Palace. I don't know. Like, Opal Palace doesn't come into play tapped, but, it's still a pretty good land.
Yep.
Just so many of these cards that are like, you really have to think about your mana base, despite
Oh, yeah.
what you may think with just common lands.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point, right? Because that's one thing I've harped about forever and a day of the format, right? The mana base is either going to have the deck fail. Like, it's either going to succeed or fail on that mana base. And Dargo Kedis is just, since we've talked about it enough here already today, that's another perfect example, right? If 6 or 7 of my lands come into play tapped, that's not a turn 2, turn 3 Dargo. That's a turn 5 Dargo. That's like, I'm just kind of moving with the flow, like just kind of whatever. That's not trying to be as competitive as possible, right? And I'm Doom, my healthy deck building is not there, right? And now this is not casual side, because in casual, sure, we could make that happen. But in like this hyper competitiveness that we have going on because we're trying to win the tournament, right? It's just not going to work.
Yeah. I want to kind of cycle back to one of our earlier topics for just a little bit here.
Oh, let's do it,
Um,
man. Let's do it. What do you got? What
what
do you
are
got?
your
What are you thinking?
thoughts on sorcery speed removal, like Flame Slash? It's Lightning
Oh,
Bolt, but it does one more damage. I think it also can't hit face, which is kind of annoying.
it
Um,
cannot.
but yeah, it's sorcery speed. What are your thoughts on those types of cards?
So for the so this is another one of those trap cards, in my opinion. I think the card is actually really good for the format as a whole, right? As a whole, I think the card's very good. But the problem is that's going in your control deck, right? That's not going in your aggro deck. That's not going in your combo deck. That's going in your control deck because you need to make sure you get the Gretchen off the table. You need to make sure you get something with a bigger butt off the table, like a Rasad maybe. Like certain things. Granted, Rasad dies the bolt too, but you need to make sure that if they have some sort of pump spell, you can deal with it. And the Flame Slash does. So that card comes with knowledge, and if you're newer to the format, I would just stay away from it. I would just play like we've said in the past. I'm just playing my heated debate. I don't need to think about it. Call it a day, right? Like I just now, granted, if I know the format better, I may make that decision based on the meta at the time.
Yeah, I think a lot of the talk about sorcery speed removal boils down to very specific meta knowledge, or it has to have such an absurdly high floor and ceiling, like Oubliette does, right? That's sorcery speed, but
Oh yeah,
it's so absurdly oppressive that it's worth paying 3 mana at sorcery speed to remove that creature. Whereas, a
yep.
lot of times murder will suffice. Um,
Well, it kind of brings us back, right? Like back all the way back to the Chain Devil, right? That's all three players at one time, including yourself, which means you could build synergies in with that Chain Devil for your own deck. And that's just absolutely bonkers, right? But now you're getting a 3-for-1, right? Because it's a Chain Devil. So that's just so much better. But in competitive tournament play, I'm playing Thunderclap, right? Because Thunderclap is going to let me beat the Peregrine Drake. It's going to let me beat, once again, that falls back to the instant speed, right? Like that's just I'm gonna be able to nuke any combo piece from Thermopod to you name it. I'm any of the. Is there a single untapped creature in the format that doesn't die to Thunderclap? They're all
um,
threes,
I think they're
right?
all threes, at least all the good ones. I think there might be a 5 mana one with a 4, but probably not great.
Yeah. So it's just there's so many cards like that you really have to be arguing to not be in your deck if you're in certain colors and certain archetypes. But that's kind of what makes our format great, though, right? Like, there aren't truly definitive cards that you need to play, but there are a few key cards that you're like, if I'm going to a tournament tomorrow, what do I need to stop?
Yeah, and that makes tech choices a lot spicier too. It's like, yeah, I still play Bolt, but I'm also playing Heated Debate because I know there's going to be a lot of blue, so on
Yep,
and so forth, stuff like that.
yep, yep, exactly. And even though most people on the surface see that that card isn't great, like when I first saw Heated Debate, I was like, what is this? This is like bad. And then I
Oh,
was
I
like,
love that
oh
card.
wait, oh but like on the surface, right? I didn't think it was very good. Like I pulled it out of a booster. I was like, oh, this is junk. And I was like, wait, I forgot I played Popper. This is actually pretty good. Let me rephrase that.
Let me
And
take
I was
that
like,
back. Let
oh
me let me walk that one
yeah,
back.
yeah. Well, okay, so it was actually kind of funny because my daughter walked up to me to look at the pack and she was like, "What's that?" And I was like, "Oh, I think this card's good. I think I'm wrong." And she goes, "Nah, that card's bad. It doesn't kill Dargo." I was like, "Oh, you're right. This card's bad." And I threw it over my shoulder. And I was like, "You're right. It's not good." And then, yeah, it still kills like Crackling Drake and all the other big bombs that you still need to be able to beat. So, yeah, just can't kill Dargo. but it could pretty much kill at everything else.
Sure. Well, do you have any other topics you want to cover before we close it up here?
Nah, man, I think we're good. I think that was pretty good, and yeah, just close this out.
Alrighty. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Competitive Popper podcast here. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to leave a like down below, leave a comment letting us know if you have any other topics. You can find us on Twitter in the About section below, so on and so forth. Hope you all have a great day. We're signing off.